Hey there, viewer. As an avid fan of completing games, I am a frequent visitor to forums and such on Reddit, where people celebrate completing great games. But there are another type of posts that I see out there, and while they aren't super commonplace, they are frequent enough that I feel like it could do with addressing. These posts are some variation of a person declaring their abject misery after completing a game. Instances where people sound like they've dragged themselves through some truly awful experiences just so they can say that they've completed it, even if it means their opinion on the game becomes soured or they're just having a miserable time throughout. Which just begs the question of, why are you doing this to yourself? I see some people talking about having profiles that only contain games they've platinumed, so they're not even allowing themselves to leave a single game uncompleted, sometimes even resorting to using a dummy account to check out a game first, and then swapping over to their purist account to complete it, which, even just saying out loud, kind of sounds insane. What I'm getting at is basically, time is precious, and pouring dozens if not hundreds of hours into a game that you're just not having fun with isn't proving anything to anyone. But I can see where that mentality can come from. It's easy to scroll through the trophies subreddit, for example, and see platinum after platinum after platinum and think, oh hey, that's what everyone's doing. They're seeing what looks like people that are exclusively completing every single game, when that just simply isn't true. So, in an effort to counteract this trend, in this video, I'm going to cover every game in 2025 that I played and did not complete. And I think it'll also just be interesting to discuss why that is with each game. So, in no particular order, the first game I'm going to talk about is Buckshot Roulette. As the name would suggest, this is essentially Russian roulette, and, it's not just with a shotgun instead of a revolver. In each round you're presented with a selection of ammunition, which is comprised of blanks and live rounds, and you essentially take turns passing the shotgun back and forth and deciding whether to attempt to shoot your opponent or trying to draw out the blanks. While this is a very simple rock, paper, scissors type situation, the game is spiced up with the addition of various items which you can use to try and leverage the statistics in your favour, but of course your opponent also has access to these tools as well. Now for this one, I think I have to give props to the advertising, because everything about the game's trailer and marketing and everything made it look a lot deeper than it actually ended up being. Once you've played through a few rounds, you've essentially seen everything this game has to offer, and your ultimate goal in a run is to essentially win 3 times in a row. So, it's a fairly straightforward setup, but perfectly reasonable for, a little bit of light fun, especially with the addition of an online mode so you can play with up to 4 people at once. So if you've got some friends over voice chat, then I can see this being particularly good fun. The problem I of course have is with the achievements. So whilst there are various miscellaneous ones for using certain items in certain ways and getting a little bit lucky in others, there is an achievement for cashing out with $1 million. At the end of a round, you get the opportunity to double down, and I believe the maths works out that in order to get to $1 million, you need to win, I think, 5 or 6 times in a row. And again, one win is made up of 3 rounds, so that means actually you need to win like 15 to 18 times in a row. And like I said, when it's a rock, paper, scissors type situation, yes, with a couple bells and whistles, but that is quite an ask in terms of RNG and luck, and it's in multiple layers. You've got the random distribution of the bullets in the chamber, you've got the random items that you're offered, and at times you've got a unpredictable AI. Sometimes there are scenarios where, it makes some questionable choices and a run that you should have lost, instead they just shoot themselves in the face and you keep going. But essentially, all this randomness makes the prospect of trying to win the game, like I say, like 15 times in a row, really ridiculous. And then to make it even worse, you then have to do it a second time. And instead of winning the $1 million, you need to lose, which is basically just win the game twice, 15 times in a row. I don't think that's a particularly fair ask for the player at all. So, it's ironic that one of the achievements is called Know When to Quit, because, yeah, I know exactly when to quit, and it is not doing these achievements. Thank you very much. So, yeah, I think these are way off balance in terms of what you should be expecting out of a player, and for that reason, I did not want to complete Buckshot Roulette. Next up is Lies of P. Lies of P is an exceptional Souls-like, combining the classic tale of Pinocchio with the grueling bosses and intricate level design of games like Bloodborne. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved Lies of P. I think the world design is magnificent. I was a huge fan of this pseudo-French steampunk aesthetic. I think the variety of locations and the environmental storytelling are wonderful. Enemy designs are brilliant. The bosses are even better. Story's great, combat's great. There's so much to love about it. But I do seem to have a bit of a track record with Souls-likes and struggling to complete these. So way back when I was playing Dark Souls, I think I got, I want to say maybe halfway through that game and just kind of lost my steam. It's like an area where there's a lake with like a Hydra type creature, or an area that was some sort of graveyard that was full of fog that was slowly killing me. So, classic Souls-like stuff really. But I just didn't have a great semblance of where I needed to go or what I needed to do in order to progress, so I never ended up finishing Dark Souls. Bloodborne, I think, is still my absolute favourite, especially, again, the world design is just glorious. Exploring the labyrinthine setup of Yharnam was an absolute joy. I loved the trick weapons in that game, which have made their way across into Lies of P. Such a high watermark in terms of games that I've played in my life. But again, I think I was about halfway through. I remember there's a lake with the moon overhead, and there's like a weird slug creature that you have to kill. And I was having trouble with that particular boss, and I just kind of lost, again, I just lost my steam with it and never ended up finishing it, which, I may in fact go back at some point and finally redo Bloodborne and give it the justice it deserves, but at least for now, that is not the case. To date, the only Souls-like that I've completed is Demon Souls, the remake. Had a great time with that, and it felt succinct. There were definitely spikes in difficulty, and there was, a real challenge throughout the game, but for whatever reason, it felt much more manageable. So even finishing a Souls-like for me is a big ask. But with Lies of P, I did get all the way through. As much as I thoroughly enjoyed it, once I got to the end, and I became aware of some of the things that I needed to do in order to complete it, like many of these Souls-like, they've got these really obtuse quest lines that you need to do throughout the game, where maybe you interact with an NPC before you do a certain action in the game, or the other way around. With Lies of P, you have this truth or lies mechanic, so essentially you need to do an entire playthrough telling the truth and an entire playthrough telling lies. So there's essentially just these really intricate little side quests that you have no real knowledge of unless you were to be following a guide very diligently throughout your playtime. And I'm not willing to ruin my experience on my first playthrough just for the sake of ticking a few extra boxes. And then once I've got to the end and seen, oh, it looked like I was going to have to do at least another 2 playthroughs to clean everything up. And as much as I'd enjoyed Lies of P, I just don't get a lot out of a second playthrough, so rather than tarnish my experience with the game, which again, absolutely loved it, I just wasn't going to complete it. My main point of contention with Lies of P is that while it nominates to have this more linear level structure, which is a great stepping stone for people who are more used to the conventional corridor shooter and allow them to dip their toe into the Souls-like genre, as you're progressing through these levels, the enemies that you're coming up against are very easy to kill. After that first level or two, they quickly deteriorated into just being fodder rather than much of an actual challenge. Most enemies in the game I could just charge up to, stun lock, and kill them in 1 or 2 hits. The bosses became the high watermark for sure, but that's why ultimately I can only give it a 4.5. As for the achievements, it's a solid 3.5 for me, but I'm just not willing to do more than 1 playthrough for a game of this size. The next game we're talking about is Tyranny. So, Tyranny, this is a proper RPG, and I really mean proper RPG. It's not, any of this sort of namby-pamby, you pick a class, but you can still basically do everything. No, this is a proper, we're talking like classic Fallout, Fallout 1. And on top of that, I think it skirts around an inherent issue with a lot of RPGs where, sure, the game says, oh, you can be the hero or you can be the villain and make all these nefarious choices, but a lot of the time most people default to just playing as the hero, even though technically you could do bad things, you just don't. In Tyranny, you are one of the baddies. There's no getting around it. so you properly have to embrace that mentality. It's just, what flavor of asshole are you going to be? You've got two main factions in the game which represent these different facets of evil, and it's all about how you're going to navigate this very complicated and really well thought out situation where this world's being invaded slowly but surely by this absolute evil, and you're acting as one of his generals and imposing his will on others in this last slither of countryside that's still standing against his tyranny. There you go. It's in the name. You can tell there's been a lot of thought and care put into the world building here. The efforts to flesh out the geopolitical history of the various regions create a deeply immersive background for the player to bounce off as they create their character and start to build a sense of how they want to try and carve out a reputation for themselves in the unfolding narrative. With the scene set, character writing layers on top of that seamlessly with a range of relationships not just between NPCs and the player, but inter-NPC dynamics as well for the player to try and navigate. While all this groundwork sets the game off on a very sturdy introduction, it was the moment-to-moment gameplay that unfortunately saw my interest trail off in about 10 or so hours. This ability-focused combat controlling a small party of companions from an isometric perspective just wasn't really doing it for me. This is a 10-year-old game now, and while graphics were rightly not one of the main focuses for Obsidian, it is low fidelity enough to feel pretty aged to look at. As a personal preference, I'm not a big RPG guy anyway, but with the biggest fans of the genre holding it up as one of the greatest of its kind, I thought if there's gonna be one I would enjoy, this would be it. Ultimately though, I did bounce off it, and that's why I'm not giving Tyranny a rating, as it would be grossly unfair considering how little of the way I made it into the game, and even more so the achievements. I dare say with it being an RPG, there will be a fair few achievements linked to branching decision points in the story, so I'd expect you'd need to finish at least 2 playthroughs to mop everything up achievements wise, so do bear that in mind if you're thinking of going for this one. I'm hoping your main takeaway from this highlight of mine is if you haven't heard of Tyranny, now you have, and if you're a fan of classic RPGs, then definitely put this one on your radar, and hopefully you have a better time with it than I did. Moving on now to Blasphemous. Well, what did I say? I said I had a problem with finishing Souls-likes, and with Blasphemous as well, you can see why I'm such a fan of Bloodborne as well, if I hadn't have already said it. So anyway, this is a 2D side-scroller, very much inspired by the likes of Dark Souls. You've got some incredibly skill-intensive combat, an upgrade system based around Tears of Atonement, which enemies drop and you use to upgrade your character and level up. And as you'd expect, whenever you die, you drop a guilt fragment which you need to collect in a single life, otherwise you will lose that progress forever. So very much built with all the trappings you'd expect to see in this genre, and I was enjoying it a fair amount. Like I say, I just lose my momentum with these games. I think I'd more or less made my way through the first main area of the game at this point. There's some terrific bosses in the lead up, and, you know, everything was pretty rock solid, honestly. And if I recall correctly, at that point, I then took a peek at the achievements list and was slightly disappointed to discover that that first area of the game, there is a speed run achievement attached to, which, yeah, generally I'm not very fond of. And this kind of solidified that I would need to do a second playthrough at the bare minimum of that first section of the game. But I did also spot there's another achievement for beating all the bosses without using the health recovery flask, and I think there would have been other ones in there as well that I'd already missed out on the first time around. And yeah, you know, there's some really solid parry mechanics in here. The world itself is incredible to behold. This insanely sanctimonious society that is practically calcified by its obsession with religion is extremely engaging to push through. Characters' movements and abilities take a little bit of getting used to, but I don't remember there being anything overly taxing, especially if you're already used to what to expect from these difficult Souls-like inspired games. And you know, the more I talk about it, the more I'm kind of struggling to justify why I didn't stick with this one. I believe the fast travel points are very sparse, so maybe I was starting to get a little sick of all the backtracking. I've also never been a big fan of when these Souls-likes deliberately obfuscate their narratives. You know, I get it, it's part of that mystique and world building, but at a certain point I do actually just kind of want to know what I'm doing. so I wouldn't be surprised if I actually come back to it at some point. Maybe not this year, but eventually, add it to the backlog, I guess. But hey, it's not always meant to be, and we're certainly not putting ourselves on trial for every single game that we don't complete. If you've been sitting on the fence with this one, and you are a fan of the Souls-like genre, definitely give it a shot, and that's pretty much all I've got to say on Blasphemous. Now let's move on to Diceomancer. Diceomancer is heavily inspired by Slay the Spire, although its hand-drawn aesthetic is multitudes better than Slay the Spire's. Gameplay centers around tackling a series of combat encounters against various minions and bosses, with that satisfying formula of deck building as you slowly improve and tweak your playstyle as you go along in order to tackle the ever-rising challenges put out before you. Where the game introduces its own unique twist is with the dice rolling mechanics. What this allows you to do, essentially at any point, as long as you have charges with your d6, is you can change any number on screen to the number that you roll on a d6. Whether that's permanently changing one of the cards in your hand or manipulating enemies on screen, the possibilities are surprisingly endless. You'd think there'd be limitations to what you would be able to do with this, but anytime you see a number, you are allowed to change it. And that central gameplay hook keeps things interesting for the whole runtime. There are 6 classes to unlock and beat the game with, and plenty of variety along the way with the various encounters to keep things fresh and interesting throughout. I would have happily ploughed through and kept going until I'd completed the whole thing. However, there are achievements related to what the game calls Ascension, which is essentially New Game Plus. Each of these Ascension tiers goes from 1 through to 20, so for this endgame achievement, you need to beat the game 20 times with each of the game's 6 classes against increasingly difficult run modifiers. Assuming you never fail even once during this Herculean task of beating the game 120 times, with each run clocking somewhere between 20 to 60 minutes, the absurd level of commitment the developer expects of its players rivals even the most dedicated fans of the deck building genre. This is quite frankly a total piss take on the developer's part. By all means, offer that nearly endless level of content for your game's biggest fans, but for everyone outside of this vanishingly small number of dedicated players, don't burden the achievements list with this insulting time sink. There's absolutely no way on this earth I'll be taking on these achievements, and I plead with you folks out there, do not fall into this trap either. Next up, we're talking about a game called Lingo. Lingo is a puzzle game centered around words and language, and really that's all I can say about it without already encroaching on spoiler territory. This is one of those games where the game basically teaches you nothing, and it's on you to discover exactly how to progress and learn the intricacies of its many mechanics. And in that respect, it's a really great game. However, as you may already have managed to glean from this footage, it has an exceedingly dry art style, like some sort of discount Minecraft, which, I can see why it's less difficult to program and build the levels for. But then, on top of it, you've also got this non-Euclidean geometry going on, where levels and corridors will fold in on themselves and make it really difficult to navigate from one area to another. And while navigating a 3D space for these puzzles is important for the game's mechanics, it is not important for the game to deliberately confuse and cause the player to get lost. And while I did enjoy the puzzles for themselves to a certain degree, after a while, once again, I just kind of checked out with it. I feel like the game had done a lot of what would make it interesting, and it was just starting to get a little bit overindulgent. And from what I can tell, I was barely even halfway through, and I was starting to lose track of all the various things that the game is asking you to keep track of in terms of rules. And yeah, as you'd expect, the achievements want you to get through the whole game, and I just wasn't interested in doing so. And the game's visuals and level design was just starting to give me a headache. Having a quick scan down the achievements list on Steam, there is literally nothing except achievements for completing each level, so I think I can fairly confidently say this is a solid 4. It's nothing standout and isn't going to impede you if you do want to pursue all the way through with it. But again, for me, not fussed. Next on the agenda is Monster Hunter Wilds. Now this one's actually an interesting one because it was bundled with the new PC that I was building, so believe me when I say there was no reason why this shouldn't have run really well on the new PC. But lo and behold, after a few hours, I was already starting to experience crashes and disconnects. Now, this was around March time, so I don't know if the game performance has improved significantly since then, but nonetheless, it was discouraging to say the least. In terms of the gameplay itself, there's a myriad of systems built upon systems here. Some really in-depth tracking and killing of these giant monsters with a huge assortment of weapons and playstyles that you can adopt in order to tackle these giant beasts. From what little of the game I did play, the graphics are exceptional. Obviously, I was experiencing a significant jump up from my old PC to this one, so I was bound to be impressed regardless. But even with that caveat, the level of detail in the environments and all the various monster designs is quite something. But while I can appreciate that this game has its rabid fan base, I was already getting a sense, even with this brief stint in the game, that this is going to be a very grindy experience. Each monster that you're hunting and killing is an individual fight which can take something like 15 minutes. And that's made up of multiple phases where you'll have a brief combat encounter and then the monster will run away. And that's without getting into all the details of specific monster parts, harvesting various plants and animals from the environment in order to craft better gear. I don't doubt that when these systems all work together and the game's not crashing, it's a really well built thing, and I can appreciate it for that, but it's just not something I'm interested in putting hours upon hours into, especially when it comes to chasing some of its achievements. If you are interested in the series, I would just be wary of exactly what those performance issues are like these days, and I expect it would be significantly improved if you had at least one or two pals to be playing this through with. The penultimate game I'm talking about today is Observation. Observation is a sci-fi thriller through and through, except rather than controlling one of the fragile astronauts, you are instead put in the control of the ship's artificial intelligence. Stranded and confused alongside the crew's medical officer Emma, an uneasy relationship plays out as both suspect the other of ulterior motives. Nonetheless, both parties are forced to work together as they desperately try to regain control of the situation as it continues to spiral out of their control. While working from behind the lens of artificial cameras through various software interfaces provides both a unique perspective and opportunities for atypical puzzle solving, overall gameplay mechanics are altogether a touch too shallow, even for a short and punchy dozen or so hours navigating the claustrophobic corridors of the space station Observation. Rest assured though, stellar character writing elevated by an emotional voice acting performance of your companion, paired with impressive lip syncing considering the development team's size, brings a pulse-pounding tension to the proceedings. Once you've finished that first playthrough, unfortunately, you cannot go back and tidy up the comprehensive list of collectibles and data points, so you're forced into a second playthrough, slavishly glued to a collectibles guide to ensure you don't miss anything the second time around, hence the 3.5 rating. The reason I didn't personally complete this one was due to technical issues. For whatever reason, despite my old PC struggling with frame rate at the end of its life, my new PC suffers from a softlock preventing me from getting past the game's initialization screen, so it seems I can't complete this one whether I like it or not, and I did like it quite a bit. And last but not least is Yes, Your Grace. Yes, Your Grace puts you in the shoes of the noble King Eric of Deverne as you attempt to navigate delicate medieval politics as the shadows of war, disease and famine loom large over your lands. Gameplay seesaws between addressing the various peasants and noble folk that seek an audience with the king, as you attempt to balance the resources of gold, food, and manpower while keeping various threats at bay. Whether these threats are the conspiratorial imaginings of your various advisors, or they are literally a week away from bashing down your gatehouse portcullis, well, that's entirely for you to decide, my liege. The second half of each day leaves you free to explore the bounds of your castle and liaise with the Queen and your daughters. Chief among your concerns is the lack of a son, which in true archaic fashion is the only way to secure your lineage and provide an heir to your kingdom. As the game's narrative starts to unfold, there are various curveballs thrown in for good measure to keep you on your toes while you're making all these difficult decisions, but altogether it felt like it fell short of being the Game of Thrones simulator I was hoping it would be. Having now seen that the game only seems to last for about a dozen or so hours, I may have let my patience wear a little thin too fast here when these light mechanics are not made to extend beyond 20 hours, which is perhaps how long I thought the game might end up being. With that said though, in order to explore all the various narrative branches to collect up all the achievements, even if it does have a shorter runtime, you are still going to have to go through it multiple times. So my intuition may have been correct here, and it wouldn't have been worth grating against some of these systems just for the sake of completion. I'm happy to be wrong on this one, as there are plenty of people who've given it a positive reception on Steam, but as far as personal preferences go, I just don't think this one was for me. And there you have it. If there's any games on this list that you want to staunchly defend in the comments and take me to court for never finishing or completing, then be my guest. Hopefully though you aren't clenching your teeth in too much fury and you did enjoy this video. Perhaps if nothing else, I've made you aware of a few games that you hadn't otherwise heard of that are pretty good. After all, I don't think anything on this list was a particular stinker. So, thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to click any of those feedback buttons below, that'd be very helpful and I greatly appreciate it. But otherwise, I'll see you in the next video, and I promise it will be for games that I have actually completed this time.